I remember him coming low. Since the ranking member of the full committee is here, we will begin. I'll give you 10 seconds. The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone here today to a hearing on intellectual property enforcement activities by the executive branch. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. The purpose of today's hearing is to scrutinize the Biden administration's enforcement of existing intellectual property laws. Any comments made today about the current administration's enforcement does not imply that previous administrations were somehow flawless. And I want to make it clear, this is a snapshot in time, but it's an important snapshot in time. IP is the foundation of our nation's economy, creativity, and innovation. But annual losses due to lack of enforcement are costing the American economy nearly $1 trillion. It is estimated to be over $715 billion. I believe that is an understatement. As far back as 2017, the cost of counterfeiting copyrighted and pirated software and the theft of trade secrets in the U.S. was estimated to be between $225 billion and $600 billion. Unsurprisingly, the People's Republic of China is the lead culprit. Last year, more than half of Customs and Border Protection's total seizures of goods came from the People's Republic of China and their captive satellite, Hong Kong. These seizures accounted for 80% of the value of all IP infringing goods that were seized. China is not only flooding the market, but the CBP, with its de minimis exception parcels, finds itself with more than 1 billion parcels. There is not enough money in the Treasury to search 1 billion parcels properly, particularly when we don't know what's in them. Yet, despite these significant economic and security threats, there has been a steady decrease in enforcement actions and prosecutions under the current administration. In 2023, the Department of Justice filed only 1 copyright piracy case. By the way, I had to correct that from 2. I've had to cut in half the amazing performance. There has been a drop in IP-related seizures at the border. No surprise, they're busy with other issues. But in fact, when you look at $1 trillion in an economy, it's meaningful. It's meaningful because of, for example, the amount of theft from this country exceeds the entire Department of Defense budget. The current administration did not nominate a new head of the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator until May of 2023 and has not pushed to have that position filled. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons that the nameplate is empty, is that the acting or doing on behalf of declined to come. Additionally, the U.S. Trade Representative declined to come. Underscoring these failures by the Biden administration to prioritize IP are 2 empty chairs here this morning. I want to make it clear. We'll clear off the empty chairs. We just wanted to make it clear that we appreciate the people who are here. We appreciate your being here. Your testimony is important. We all know that you're not the problem, but you're here to explain what the problem is and how we can work together on solutions. With that, I would recognize, are you ready?
Yes.
The ranking member of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking you for convening this important hearing. The agencies represented here today are on the front lines of preventing piracy, keeping counterfeits off the market, and securing our businesses' trade secrets. And it's important that we, as one of the committees responsible for their oversight, have the opportunity to engage them about their work. It is one of the quirks of our intellectual property system that in many cases, it's up to the IP owners themselves to enforce their rights. If an individual holds a copyright, trademark, or patent, that intellectual property is worth very little unless they police it themselves. An individual can hold a patent, for example, but that patent is only as good as its owner's ability to enforce it in a court of law. Some IP protections, however, are also policed by the federal government. Customs and Border Protection prevents products that violate our intellectual property laws from entering the country. Homeland Security Investigations, through its IPR Center, works across nations and with international governmental agencies to prevent theft of American IP. And the Department of Justice, through its investigators at the FBI and prosecutors with CCIPS, investigates and prosecutes intellectual property cases ranging from piracy of e-books to trade secret theft at the highest levels of American business. Their work is essential to our economic competitiveness in the United States. Just last month, an article in Bloomberg declared that my home state of Georgia, quote, is booming like it never did before Joe Biden became the 46th president, end quote. That is in part because of our strong IP protections for creators, innovators, and artists, including those who call the Atlanta area home. But enforcement of intellectual property protections helps more than just our economy. It also keeps consumers safe. Counterfeit products can pose real dangers to Americans. Imagine learning that your car is equipped with an airbag that wasn't manufactured to American safety standards, or that the moisturizer you just brought, the makeup you applied, or even the pills you took for a medical condition were made with cheap toxic chemicals, or that the batteries you brought on an e-commerce site might start a fire in your home. When counterfeit products slip through the cracks, these dangers become all too real. In many cases, consumers, manufacturers, and online marketplaces don't even know that the products are counterfeit until it's too late. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses how their agencies are working to prevent counterfeits and pirated goods from entering our stream of commerce, including managing the increase in de minimis shipments from e-commerce sites and scaling up enforcement by adopting AI-driven systems. Another threat to consumers comes from cybersecurity risks posed by digital piracy. Today, it is all too easy to unwittingly download a file from an illegal source or click on the wrong links for a live-streamed cultural or athletic event. And then there is the economic harm associated with piracy. According to recent estimates from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center, digital piracy and illegal streaming services cost our economy about $30 billion per year in lost revenue. The work these agencies do to prevent online piracy helps keep our economy strong, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses about recent successes of taking down pirated streaming operations and how they plan to increase enforcement of copyright piracy. The agencies represented today are staffed with dedicated and capable public servants, but the challenges they confront cannot be solved by the American government alone. It is crucial that we work together with other governments and their law enforcement agencies to combat the real dangers of IP theft to the health, our economy, and the safety of our citizens. Finally, I appreciate that we often work in a bipartisan nature on this subcommittee. Our work reaffirms the principle that we do not need to agree on everything to get some good work done. But putting these empty chairs here appears more political theater than good, honest policymaking or oversight, because the Senate has not yet confirmed an IPEC, and I encourage them to confirm Ms. Robinson's nomination as soon as possible there is no one available to appear here. And with regard to U.S. Tiara, Congress has a responsibility to accommodate the executive branch. Stunts like this make the back and forth harder, not easier, and I would advise against it in future hearings. It's my hope that we on this committee can do our part to safeguard intellectual property, continue our trend of strong economic growth, and keep consumers safe. I thank the witnesses for appearing today, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, intellectual property in the United States at its core is the right to own an idea. The power of IP is not in the individual movie, the chemical compound, or the store sign, though they certainly have value, but in the exclusive authority to reproduce that protected content. Because it's difficult to put most creations in the stream of commerce while also keeping them under lock and key, the enforcement of IP protections is key to the success of our system. If the ideas we protect are easily stolen, then they hold no value. And if copyrights, trademarks, and patents have no value, then the American system cannot encourage innovation, protect consumers, help drive economic growth, and keep our country safe. Responsibility for IP investigation, enforcement, and prosecution is spread across multiple agencies within the executive branch. The Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section at the Department of Justice is responsible for protecting American businesses by stopping copyright piracy, prosecuting trademark violations, and preventing economic espionage. The National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, or the IPR Center, within the Homeland Security Investigations Branch at DHS, acts as a hub for all its enforcement activities, combining regulatory, civil, and criminal authorities to execute a mission that varies from investigation of crimes to educating the public about IP theft. Finally, Customs and Border Protection enforces our laws at our ports of entry, inspecting packages and shipments for counterfeit goods and collaborating with other agency leads to shut down IP violators operating overseas. Our witnesses today represent these agency departments tasked with federal enforcement of our IP system. Their authority is clearly broad and wide-ranging, from enhancing cybersecurity and stopping copyright piracy to counterfeit enforcement and protection of trade secrets. And recent technological innovations have further complicated this already complex web of enforcement responsibilities. The widespread availability of 3D printing to create counterfeit goods, of artificial intelligence to replicate copyrighted works, and of advanced technology to make pirated live streams available to living rooms around the world have all made it harder to protect Americans' creative works. Technology innovations that allow users to evade IP protections do not mean we are in a post-IP world. Far from it. America's leadership in AI, our flourishing research institutions, and our diverse creative communities show that strong intellectual property protections mean a healthy innovation ecosystem. But as those who wish to take advantage of our IP system change how they do business, our approach to enforcement, too, must change. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing from our witnesses how the shift to selling counterfeit goods on e-commerce platforms has affected their work. Over the past few years, violators have increasingly moved to e-commerce sites to ship counterfeit goods into the United States. This has been accompanied by a related change from larger shipments to smaller parcels containing counterfeits that are easier to evade detection. Between 2019 and 2022, those smaller mailings of counterfeits increased from a little over 400 million to nearly 700 million shipments. I was glad to see recent data from the Biden administration that HSI initiated 81 criminal investigations and conducted 94 seizures related to its e-commerce enforcement operation in fiscal year 2023, preventing hundreds of thousands of dollars in counterfeit goods from reaching the market, while also securing several indictments and convictions of bad actors. I am concerned, however, about the ongoing proliferation of counterfeit products available on e-commerce platforms, and I look forward to reintroducing my bill, the Shop Safe Act, with Chairman Issa soon, which will further reduce the number of dangerous counterfeits online. While threats to Americans' intellectual property come from many different countries, including within the United States, the government of China presents a persistent threat to our IP system. This reality underscores the importance of our patents, our trademarks, and our copyrights, not just to our creators and businesses, but to our national security overall. Over the last year, the chairman has held multiple hearings on the IP threat from the Chinese government. And at every one, I have emphasized the importance of protecting our system from nation-states seeking tactical advantage by violating our innovators' rights. At each of these hearings, however, I have also cautioned my colleagues that recognizing a threat from a foreign government is different from treating every citizen of that country as a threat. I was glad when the Biden administration ended the China Initiative, which sought to target individuals based on where they were from rather than what they were doing. This strategy ruined successful careers while yielding no meaningful results, and I'm looking forward to hearing about DOJ's successful prosecutions since it changed its approach. Finally, it is imperative that the agencies responsible for the protection of our intellectual property rights can coordinate across agencies to maximize their effectiveness. The White House Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator, or IPEC, is tasked with coordinating a whole-of-government approach to the enforcement of IP rights. While the office continues to do good work, the Senate, unfortunately, has not yet confirmed President Biden's nominee for coordinator. I sincerely hope that Ms. Robinson's nomination is considered soon so that she can begin the important work of ensuring our IP laws are supported across the administration. I'd like to thank Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Johnson for holding this important hearing, and I extend my appreciation to the witnesses for appearing before us today. I look forward to hearing how your agency's activities fit into the larger picture of IP enforcement across the government and what resources you need to further prevent IP violations by those who seek to take advantage of our system and our creators. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Without objection, all of their opening statements will be included in the record. It is now my honor to introduce our distinguished panel of witnesses. Mr. Michael Ball is the Acting Assistant Director for Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, Global Trade Division at the Department of Homeland Security. In this role, Mr. Ball oversees operational activities of HSI and GTD's national program related to trade enforcement and intellectual property and counterfeit proliferation investigations. He also serves as the acting director of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. We also have here Mr. Josh Goldfoot. Mr. Goldfoot is the acting deputy assistant attorney in the Department of Justice Criminal Division, where he supervises Criminal Division Computer Crime and Intellectual Property Section and the Child Exploitation Obscenity Section. He has previously served as the Principal Deputy Chief of the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property Section for 8 years and served as Deputy Chief for Cyber Policy in DOJ's National Security Division for 3 years before that. Welcome. Mr. Brandon Lord is the Executive Director of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, Trade Policy and Programs Directorate. In that role, he is responsible for policy enforcement priorities and stakeholder outreach related to CBP's priority trade issues. He also oversees the 21st Century Customs Framework Initiative and 2 ongoing pilots, the Section 321 Data Pilot and Entry Type 86 Test, which cover the review of what we will refer to repeatedly today as de minimis e-commerce shipments. Not present, and regrettably, the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator. Although the Office of Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator is critical and exists for a reason, no one was nominated for the first 3 years of the administration, and when nominated, the nominee has not been confirmed. For that period of time, there has been an acting or performing duties as who declined to come, stating that they were career professionals and inappropriate. I might note for my members here on both sides of the aisle that we have 2 actings here. This committee does not assume that we can have somebody who's been confirmed when no one's confirmed. We take the acting or the person most knowledgeable, and we take them as prepared to answer the questions, and by the way, as dedicated public servants who deserve to be in that position. Lastly, with great disappointment, the U.S. Trade Representative declined to be here. We had many important questions, some of which I will now ask unanimous consent that these public documents be placed in the record. That stack of them is sitting there at the empty chair. Without objection, so ordered. These documents were the only ones we could glean, but they do include important information that we wanted to ask about, including the TRIPS waiver, items that USTR has authority over that do affect the ability for countries to, in fact, participate in a way that can undermine the work of the other three witnesses here. Those would not have been the only questions, but within our jurisdiction, they would have been the ones that we were most interested in. So I would ask the staff to remove the name tags of the individuals who were not able to be here, and would ask the three witnesses to rise and take the oath. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. For the witnesses, please know that your written testimony will be placed in the record in its entirety. So that gives you the ability to read your statement, or summarize, or even go off message, but please try to stay as close as you can to 5 minutes so we can get to a round of questioning. With that, Mr. Ball is recognized for his opening, or for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and distinguished members of this committee, on behalf of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee. Homeland Security Investigations, formed by the Homeland Security Act in 2002, is the largest investigative component of the Department of Homeland Security, empowered with broad legal authority to conduct federal criminal investigations into the illegal cross-border movement of people, goods, money, technology, and other contraband throughout the United States. With the authority to enforce more than 400 federal statutes, HSI investigates, disrupts, and dismantles transnational criminal organizations and national security threats seeking to exploit the customs and immigration laws of the United States. HSI's footprint extends to more than 6,800 special agents, assigned to 235 domestic field offices, and more than 90 international offices in more than 50 countries. HSI's international presence is the largest within DHS and enables HSI investigations to reach beyond our borders. HSI's cadre of internationally deployed special agents, colonel analysts, and mission support personnel work alongside locally employed staff and foreign law enforcement partners to advance the HSI and DHS mission around the world. I serve as the Acting Assistant Director of HSI's Global Trade Division. The Global Trade Division provides oversight and support for criminal investigations of U.S. import and export laws to ensure national security, protect the public's health and safety, stop predatory and illegal trade practices, and prevent sensitive U.S. technologies and weapons from reaching transnational criminal organizations and foreign adversaries. I also serve as the Acting Director of the National IPR Center. The IPR Center leads the federal government's efforts to enforce international trade laws and to stop global intellectual property theft. In FY23, HSI initiated 623 cases, 434 criminal arrests, obtained 327 indictments, and 206 convictions related solely to IP theft and commercial fraud. The IPR Center disrupts and dismantles criminal networks using a whole-of-government approach, including interdiction, investigation, outreach, and training. Created in 2000 and codified by the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015, or TFTIA, the IPR Center is responsible for coordinating the federal government's enforcement of IP laws. The IPR Center focuses on criminal investigations impacting health and safety, national security, and the U.S. economy. We have programs dedicated to addressing counterfeit pharmaceuticals and medical devices, consumer electronics and technology, automotive parts, luxury goods, apparel, cosmetics, and digital piracy. We also identify and investigate counterfeits in the U.S. government supply chain, with an emphasis on counterfeit microelectronics in the DoD supply chain. Together with IP administrative and regulatory agencies, including the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the IPR Center stands at the forefront of IP enforcement. The IPR Center structure leverages the authorities, resources, and skills of each participating agency. The IPR Center is headed by HSI, with deputy directors from HSI, CBP, and the FBI. Each of the agencies represented at the IPR Center bring their unique authorities, jurisdictions, and culture together to coordinate a whole-of-government IP approach. The key to the IPR Center's operating model are our partnerships. We partner with federal agencies, including DOJ, Department of Commerce, State Department, Food and Drug Administrations, Veterans Affairs, DOD, and many others. We also partner with international law enforcement agencies, academic institutions, and private industry. While each partnership is unique, the goal is always to enhance each organization's capabilities in furtherance of investigative case support, training, and outreach. Outside of our federal and international law enforcement partners, the IPR Center maintains robust partnerships and significant engagement with private industry, a range of industry leaders, and industry associations. Protecting IP is a global problem that requires a whole-of-government approach. Strong partnerships with private industry and continued collaboration with academic and public partners. HSI and the IPR Center are on the forefront of IP enforcement, leveraging the strengths of our partners to constantly adapt to the evolving tactics of transnational criminal organizations. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Goldfoot.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and the members of the subcommittee. My name is Josh Goldfoot, and I am an acting Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the important work of intellectual property enforcement in the Department of Justice. I'll say it's also an honor to be here today with Mr. Ball and Mr. Lord, two representatives of agencies we work with so much in enforcing intellectual property laws. The core responsibility of the Criminal Division is to ensure the enforcement of U.S. law through effective prosecutions, to vindicate the interests of the public and to deter unlawful conduct. The Criminal Division prosecutes all federal crimes not otherwise specifically assigned to other divisions. The Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section, which is abbreviated CCIPS, and we pronounce it CCIPS, is a section within the Criminal Division, and it executes the Criminal Division's work in enforcing intellectual property statutes. The members of the IP team at CCIPS prosecute criminal IP cases, as well as serve as a source of expertise for other prosecutors, including more than 260 computer hacking and intellectual property AUSAs and investigators across the country. CCIPS works closely with the investigative partners at the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center to coordinate among multiple jurisdictions in complex IP matters. The internet and the globalization of trade make IP crime truly a global problem. To counter the problem of international IP crime, the department focuses additional resources funded by the Department of State on international engagement, including developing relationships and engaging in cooperative enforcement efforts with foreign law enforcement agencies, supporting training, case-based mentoring, and other capacity building where appropriate. Central to the department's international efforts on IP enforcement is the International Computer Hacking and Intellectual Property Program, or ICHIP program, a network of federal prosecutors with expertise in IP crime and other high-tech legal issues, stationed in U.S. missions in key regions around the world, and supported by U.S.-based legal experts specializing in internet fraud and public health, illicit markets, cryptocurrency, as well as digital forensic experts in CCIP's Cybercrime Lab. While IP is a key driver of the U.S. economy across many sectors, some technologies protected by IP rights have national security implications that warrant extra attention. The department, led by my colleagues in the National Security Division, takes a multi-pronged approach to identify and counter nation-state threats to U.S. IP and technology that affect U.S. security interests. The Criminal Division works with the National Security Division to advise on trade secret and economic espionage cases and prioritize those with an international or nation-state connection. In February of 2023, the Deputy Attorney General announced the creation of the department's Disruptive Technology Strike Force, a partnership between the Department of Justice and the Department of Commerce, designed to enforce U.S. laws protecting U.S. advanced technologies from illegal acquisition and use by nation-state adversaries. Under the leadership of the department's National Security Division and the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, the Strike Force brings together experts throughout government, including the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, and 17 U.S. attorneys' offices in metropolitan regions across the country, to target illicit actors, strengthen supply chains, and protect critical technological assets from being acquired or used by nation-state adversaries. In conclusion, the department appreciates the opportunity to present information about the ongoing efforts to protect IP rights, both within the department and in collaboration with the other agencies represented here today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Mr. Lord.
Good morning. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss U.S. Customs and Border Protection's role in enforcing intellectual property rights, or IPR. I am proud to represent the nearly 30,000 CBP officers, trade specialists, and others who enforce U.S. trade laws and protect our national and economic security. Trade in counterfeit and pirated goods threatens America's economy and industry, the livelihood of U.S. workers, and in some cases, national security and the health and safety of consumers. By some estimates, counterfeit products cause over 70 deaths and 350,000 serious injuries every year. Furthermore, trading these illegitimate goods is frequently linked to smuggling and other criminal activities. That's why CBP has designated intellectual property rights as a priority trade issue since 2007. Last fiscal year, CBP seized and destroyed over 23 million counterfeit items valued at $2.7 billion had they in fact been genuine. CBP is on pace to achieve similar results this fiscal year. CBP performs its IPR enforcement mission in a challenging and dynamic trade environment. Increasing volumes of small packages valued under the $800 de minimis threshold has significantly altered the dynamic of the international trade environment and CBP's intellectual property rights enforcement approach. Small packages arriving at our seaports, airports, and land border ports of entry pose the same health, safety, and economic security risks as traditional containerized shipments, but the volume is higher and growing. The 600 million small packages that CBP processed in fiscal year 2022 increased to more than 1 billion in FY23. And now, today, CBP is processing close to 4 million small packages every day across the nation. These numbers are even more significant considering 90% of our intellectual property rights related seizures in FY23 occurred in the small package environment. For all imports, from de minimis packages to traditional containerized cargo, CBP enforces hundreds of U.S. trade laws and regulations on behalf of over 45 different U.S. federal agencies by applying our advanced targeting capabilities, collaborating with Homeland Security investigations and other government partners, and engaging industry stakeholders. Partnerships and information sharing are the cornerstones of CBP's IPR enforcement strategy. For example, CBP has an integral role in the IPR Center. In addition to my position at CBP, I serve as one of 3 deputy directors at the IPR Center, where my staff works side by side with our colleagues at HSI and 30 additional partners to strengthen our joint enforcement efforts. Collaboration between the IPR Center and the CBP ports of entry generated thousands of IPR-related case leads last year for potential criminal investigation. We also work very closely with private industry. Thanks to the support of Congress, the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015 expanded CBP's authorities to allow direct engagement with intellectual property rights holders to verify the authenticity of imported products that CBP encounters. This capability has been a powerful tool for protecting the owners of intellectual property and stopping counterfeit products from entering the United States. Building on our current authorities and capabilities, CBP is working in close coordination with Congress and our trade stakeholders to advance its 21st Century Customs Framework Initiative, commonly referred to as 21CCF, to ensure the agency is positioned to address these evolving trade enforcement challenges. Information sharing, an activity proven to be a vital tool for trade enforcement, is a central pillar of this initiative. 21CCF includes a statutory concept that would authorize CBP to share additional information with private industry beyond a shipment-specific event to better identify and track illicit sellers who use online marketplaces to import IPR infringing goods into the United States. The 21CCF initiative also pursues several other concepts that would allow for more efficient seizure and disposition of IPR violative goods in the de minimis shipment environment and stricter penalties for noncompliance. In all shipping environments, CBP is committed to protecting businesses and consumers from the health and safety and economic risks associated with IPR violations. CBP will continue to collaborate with Congress and our government and private industry partners to identify workable solutions to IPR enforcement challenges. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support of CBP's trade enforcement mission. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for a quick round of questioning. Mr. Lord, from your experience, you gave us nearly $3 billion of seizures, 23 million seizures, some of which were in the de minimis, but most, I assume, were in larger shipments. Is that correct?
No, sir. Actually, the 90% of our intellectual property rights seizures did occur in the de minimis environment.
So the de minimis environment, the $800, or at least alleged to be $800 in value, because if they're true Louis Vuittons, they would be more than that for just one. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, sir. I'm not 100% familiar with the going price for a Louis Vuitton bag. My wife might be better at that, but yes, if the bag as a genuine article is in fact valued at more than $800, it would not be eligible for.
So when these come in at $800, sometimes they actually are more than $800 selling price, but that's what they claim. And the reality is this is a backdoor and abusive system that particularly China has figured out and is gaming to the tune of 1 billion parcels a year.
Well, Chairman, I would just start by saying that, in the environment we see today, the average declared value of a shipment is $50. The vast majority of shipments are declared well under $100. So while we see shipments that are declared higher dollar value, and there certainly are instances of legitimate shipments being well valued over 800, but being declared under 800, the vast majority of what we see from a value perspective is in fact much, much less than $800.
So in order to fix this, we have to deal not at going from 800 to 400 or 200. We have to deal with the fact that a $50 or $100 declared value is in fact very, very often, and I'll use that fake Louis Vuitton as an example, but it could be a fake Rolex, it could be any number, it could be, as the ranking member said, counterfeit cosmetics that literally can burn your face. It could be any of that.
That's correct.
So this is but it is clearly a backdoor, something that you do not have the authority to change, only Congress does. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're looking at other ways, sir, to better manage that risk environment. It is, at close to 4 million small packages a day. It is an area of concern for us. We're looking at making changes to our regulatory environment, as well as making investments in key infrastructure and technology to help us better manage that.
Let me ask one quick question. It may tax some of the expertise, but it's a potential solution. As somebody who shipped to and from around the world for years, and sometimes using Speed Post and other systems that offer that de minimis opportunity, if you were given the authority not only to reduce the amount, but also to create two categories: known shipper, meaning the shipper of de minimis who has been cleared, who has that responsibility because they do ship, for example, to Amazon regularly or whatever, and then concentrate on those who are not, if you will, a trusted shipper. Would that help in your authority if Congress gave you that specific opportunity?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I would start by just saying, given the very real economic benefits of the de minimis exception, I'm not sure as a law enforcement agency we're best placed to make the decision as to what the dollar value should or should not be in that environment. Regarding the known shipper idea, that is an idea that we are looking at internally. The challenge in the environment, without spending too much time on it, sir, is it's very low barriers to enter as an overseas shipper, very low incentive to learn our laws and our customs regulations and our requirements, and the cost of being caught is too low to deter bad behavior. So what that means is the minute you figure out somebody might be trusted or somebody might be a violative shipper, they may disappear tomorrow and reconstitute as a completely different entity. And since this is all overseas, it does
I appreciate that. And Mr. Ball, I apologize for not having time to ask all of your questions, but Mr. Goldfoot, my round of questioning and any additional time I have will really concentrate on why are there so few prosecutions in this area? Are they incredibly difficult? And I'll just give you a quick example, hopefully a quick answer. I was a shipper. I was an importer. My products came from Hong Kong and Taiwan, almost exclusively from Taiwan. Fake Viper security systems came in from South Korea. They were discovered inside what was purported to be garment. They had no business being in to begin with. I was able to get the seizure of it. I was able to get Customs and Border to eventually destroy them. I was even able to get one sample so I could verify that not only was it not mine, it hadn't been transshipped, but the Korean manufacturer, who he was, and so on. We knew who the Korean manufacturer was. We turned that over. Of course, they knew where the product was going. There was no prosecution. So I ask you today, because this is an old one, but it obviously is still happening, why is it you do not routinely send the FBI or other agencies to the recipient of large counterfeit shipments and follow up with prosecution more often than the records indicate?
Thank you for the question. So I think your question also hints at some of the answer, which is to say that these cases can be quite complex. And while it is one thing to detect at the border that goods are counterfeit, seize them and dispose of them appropriately, identifying a defendant with whom we can charge with counterfeiting with proof beyond a reasonable doubt, getting that defendant into court, particularly if they're in Korea or some other foreign jurisdiction, requires considerable resources.
My question was actually as to the recipient, if you don't mind. We'll focus on that.
As to the recipient specifically.
The
yes.
buyer.
Thank you, sir, for the clarification. Here again, there can be some difficulty in identifying that all the necessary elements of the case, such as that the recipient understood what they were bringing in. But let me speak more broadly of how we're spending our resources. We are, given the resources we have, we are prioritizing cases in trademark and counterfeiting that affect health and safety issues. For example, a case I like to think of, we did, I think about 2 years ago. It was two individuals from Ukraine, Maxim Niendov and Volodymyr Nikolayenko. Both ran a company called Healthy Nation. This company was importing counterfeit cancer medicine into the United States. These were pills that were marked as though they were legitimate cancer medicine, but they had inactive ingredients. They did nothing. And unsuspecting Americans were receiving this counterfeit medication, taking it, hoping to treat their cancer, and there were disastrous results. We focus on cases like that. We focus on a case like we sentenced last week, Mr. Oksoy, who was selling counterfeit Cisco routers. These routers were being sold to hospitals, to government installations, and they were counterfeit. They didn't work, or they didn't work longer than a few days. There were patchy things that the actual company would never sell. You can imagine the threat to health and public safety that occurs from those. So I think you and I agree. I would like to see more counterfeit prosecutions as well. I think probably anyone who works in law enforcement, if you ask him or her, are you satisfied with the amount of cases you're doing, whether it's IP or some other field, will say no. But given the resources we have, we're looking to create the maximum benefit for the American people.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say straight out that this subcommittee has been very unique in terms of the Judiciary Committee in that the leadership of the committee has always been, the leadership of the subcommittee has always been open, forthright, and apolitical when it comes to the operations of this subcommittee. And so I made some comments about the empty chairs here this morning. I'll note that the markings for the empty chairs have been removed, and that's a testament to the good faith of the chair of this committee, who sometimes can be misunderstood in terms of his actions, but nothing that communication cannot cure. So I appreciate the chairman. And Mr. Lord, in your written statement, you discussed the increase in the use of de minimis administrative exemptions to reach consumers directly, including over 1 billion shipments, and those are coming in at the rate of 4 million per day, as you've said, that are processed by CBP in fiscal year 2023 alone. Can you walk us through how e-commerce sites are driving an increase in these smaller shipments?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I appreciate the question. I would just begin by saying, we actually believe the internet writ large is driving this increase. I mean, you can go to almost any retailer or any website and order something. Maybe it's online, maybe it's an online marketplace, maybe it's a favorite clothing brand, and that gets shipped direct to your house from overseas. Oftentimes, the American consumer not knowing that it originated from overseas. Having said all that, sir, the challenge that we face with online marketplaces is that it's very easy to sign up as a seller on those online marketplaces, as a foreign seller. I'm talking about foreign sellers only. I'm not talking about U.S. citizens selling. Foreign sellers selling on these online marketplaces. It's a low cost. There's oftentimes little, if any, guidance given on what the expectations are to comply with U.S. laws. Especially if you're shipping a product that might be regulated, say, by the Consumer Product Safety Commission or maybe the Food and Drug Administration. And then when that sale is made, it's very easy to just drop that into your country's post service or use another freight forwarder or logistics provider to move that into the country through the de minimis exemption. The last thing I would say that's challenging about that, too, is it's very easy for a foreign seller to take down their listing on an online marketplace, move to a different online marketplace, or even stay on the same online marketplace but just come back as a seemingly new or different entity. All that makes our targeting and interdiction that much more difficult at the border.
Thank you. Mr. Ball, you've testified that HSI's Innovation Lab is using AI to enhance staff capabilities. Can you walk us through how AI is helping staff currently and how you see the technology being used in the future to expand your agency's reach?
Yes, sir, it's a great question. So the Innovation Lab within HSI is relatively unique in federal law enforcement. It's an entity in our Cyber and Operational Technology Division dedicated to out-of-the-box thinking using advanced technology to further criminal investigations. When I started working criminal investigations, I'm dating myself a bit here, when we would plan for a search warrant, you'd have to take into account renting a truck and getting hand trucks and boxes, moving file cabinets and boxes of paper to go through. Today, that's not the case. You're dealing with terabytes and petabytes of data that are collected on search warrant or through other court processes that we have to sift through. The Innovation Lab is currently using AI technology to help criminal investigations sift through those court processes to identify items of evidence, things that we're looking for that are in that search warrant, to take criminal investigations with the goal of taking those criminal investigations down from that aspect of it, from weeks, months, and numbers of people, now down to much shorter. So we're very proud of that effort that we're using at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just about run out of time, so I'll yield.
Oh, I did run a little over.
Well, I know you did, but I'm not going to follow your abuse of the process.
I thank the gentleman for part of that. With that, we go to Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Goldfoot, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, DOJ filed only 6 new trade secret theft cases in 2022, as compared with over 91 cases filed between 2017 and 2021. What are your thoughts on why that happened? Why such a reduction?
Thank you for the question. So I think when I look at trade secret case statistics, I'm a little less concerned about fluctuations from year to year. I focus more on the impact of what we are doing and how we're using our resources to best serve the American people. What I mean by that is trade secret cases are truly some of the most complex cases that I've seen worked on in the sections I supervise. These are cases that, in addition to the difficulties that come with being a white-collar case, typically also require the investigators and the prosecutors to become deeply familiar with the technology at issue. And sometimes that means mastery over not just the technology, but an entire industry that you've never heard of or worked on before. I think about a recent case we did involving the chemical lining on the inside of beverage containers, known as BPA-free, and that was a trade secret that was stolen. The work involved in identifying that and preparing a case like that, not to mention the different proof issues involved with the trade secret statute, such as establishing all the aspects of a trade secret are maintained, the amount of preparation can be intense. Now, I think where you and I agree is the number is lower than it ought to be. I wish that we could be doing more of these cases. We're doing what we can with the resources that have been provided.
So coincidentally, in February of 2022, when DOJ ended the China initiative, do you think there's any relationship there because of the decline in prosecutions, maybe because of the trade secret theft, do you think this decline had anything to do with the elimination of the China initiative?
Well, thank you for the question. I do not think the fluctuation in the statistics was caused by the end of the China initiative. So the China initiative was, I should clarify, this was my colleagues in the National Security Division. I don't want to take credit for their work, but they're continuing to do excellent work in this field. In February 22, as you say, the Assistant Attorney General Olson, at the same time that he canceled the China initiative, he launched a new initiative, the National Strategy to Counter Nation-State Threats. The same work as before, looking about China, the PRC's theft of American intellectual property, continues to be done under that present initiative, and now also through the Destructive Technology Strike Force, which has been in effect for about a year. You can look at recent announcements out of National Security Division. In March 2024, they announced one case about an arrest of an individual who is taking technology related to electric car batteries and planning to give that to a PRC-related company. There was another case in March 2024 where someone attempted to steal files from Google related to artificial intelligence technology and give it to a PRC-related entity. So I see the NSD's work in countering intellectual property theft to benefit the PRC continuing. What Assistant General Olson said when he canceled the China initiative is he was concerned that the name was giving people an incorrect impression that the department was cutting corners in these cases. And he found that to be harmful to his prosecutor's work.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak in one more question here. I'm concerned with the amount of counterfeit goods coming into the United States under de minimis, which we talked about before. But Mr. Lord, how are they leveraging the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center when it comes to specifically vaping products, which has suddenly risen, I think, in overall concern about some of the knockoffs, I think, that you're seeing globally right now. Can you talk about that very specific subject?
Happy to, Congressman, and thank you for the question. You know, our approach to vaping products in the de minimis space is very similar to what we do with other products. So anytime our officers at a port of entry make an interdiction or detain a good, they do two things. First, they call the partner government agency that might regulate that product. In the case of vaping products, that's the Food and Drug Administration, to get some advice on what to do, what should the ultimate disposition of that product be. And then, of course, we have our special agents from Homeland Security Investigations at all of our ports of entry where these goods are coming in, and they'll alert HSI if we, in fact, do make a seizure of those goods. That work that starts at that port of entry then moves up to the National IPR Center as appropriate, based on, sometimes most of the time, it's a pattern of seizures, right, that might speak to certain means, methods, and tactics that warrant a more specific, criminal investigation or additional action by the other government agencies that are at the IPR Center.
Yeah, yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ball, last year, HSI opened 81 criminal investigations through its e-commerce program, iOS. These operations included 94 seizures with an estimated value of over $300,000. How does HSI and the IPR Center work with e-commerce platforms to prevent the intrusion of counterfeit goods into the stream of commerce?
That's a great question, sir. We found early on in the flow of e-commerce, especially in the increase of de minimis, that we were running into an issue. One of the things that we do at the National Intellectual Property Rights Center is coordinate very well with industry. The major e-commerce platforms were encountering counterfeits, were encountering bad actors, but weren't talking to each other. Worried about trade secrets, worried about bad publicity, worried about things shifting from one to the other. We brought the 4 major platforms together, Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, and Walmart, to create an e-commerce task force. This e-commerce working group, we were able to use some great common practices and some best practices that we had used with the automotive industry, with the airbag issue, where they created an industry group called A2C2 that's extremely effective, and bring that to bear on the e-commerce platform. So to date, they have agreed for a joint counsel. They have agreed to a third-party data contract where they can share that information with each other. And then that information also flows to HSI for criminal investigations as well.
Thank you. Mr. Goldfoot, just a few months ago in March, the GAO submitted a report to Congress with recommendations for stronger fraud risk management in the trademark system. The study found that in recent years, there have been a growing number of trademark applications with false or inaccurate images of goods that are not actually sold or used, making it more difficult for businesses to find unused trademarks. The GAO warns that, quote, as generative AI becomes more advanced, the potential for more sophisticated fraudulent activity could increase, close quote. Though the GAO primarily directs this warning to the PTO, it flags that it would be incumbent on the DOJ to pursue charges when the PTO discovers such instances of trademark fraud. Are you aware of the GAO's report, and how are you thinking about the use of generative AI to facilitate fraud?
Well, thank you, sir, for that question. I was not aware of the report you just described, but now that you've brought it to my attention, I'll absolutely look at that. I think we are looking at all the different ways that artificial intelligence changes the game in the enforcement of intellectual property laws. I think you can look at it from 2 different directions. One is, how does it make crime easier, such as the situation you described, where people are using generative AI to create meritless trademark filings. Also, we're within the Department of Justice looking at how we can use it to improve our own enterprise and improve our ability to go after intellectual property crime.
Thank you. Mr. Lord, in a 2018 study by the Department of Commerce, the authors discussed the introduction of counterfeit semiconductors, including chips infected with malware, into the product supply chain for defense manufacturing and operations. Counterfeit chips are a significant concern for our national security, particularly because many of these products originate in China, where multiple cyber intrusions against the United States have originated. Could you explain how infected chips affect our national security and what your agency is doing to prevent this problem from spreading?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I appreciate the question. Yes, happy to explain. So first and foremost, Customs and Border Protection works closely with private industry on such matters. It is very difficult to expect a CBP officer working at a port of entry to just be able to look at a semiconductor and make a decision on counterfeits. And that's why we lean heavily on our donation acceptance program, which is an authority that Congress gave us in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. What that program allows is for private sector industry to donate to CBP authentication devices. Cisco and Apple are two that have signed up for that program now and provide those devices to our officers at ports of entry to help make better determinations on authentication. In terms of the danger of getting into the military supply chain, we're regular participants through the IPR Center in an operation called Chain Reaction, which is entirely focused on keeping semiconductors out of sensitive supply chains. The Cisco case that Mr. Goldfoot referenced earlier came out of that very operation, and CBP had a role in interdicting counterfeit shipments, identifying the means, methods, and tactics, referring that to the investigators, and then also participating in the search warrants that helped build that case.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentlemen, thank you, gentlemen. We now go to the gentleman from Oregon for 5 minutes. Mr. Benz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony today. I'm looking at an article from Reuters dated October 18th of 2023, where they say 5 countries came together, including United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and made comments following meetings with private companies in Silicon Valley. FBI Director Christopher Wray said, excuse me, the unprecedented joint call was meant to confront the threat China poses to innovation across the world. From quantum technology and robotics to biotechnology and artificial intelligence, China was stealing secrets in various sectors. He goes on to say the incredible amount of theft, I'll just read the exact phrase, what makes this so challenging is all the tools deployed in tandem at a scale of the likes which we have never seen, Christopher Wray said. The officials called for private industry and academia to help in countering those threats, chief among them, which they said were artificial intelligence tools. We worry about AI as an amplifier for all sorts of misconduct, Wray said, accusing China of stealing more personal and corporate data than any other nation by orders of magnitude. Mr. Lord, so assuming that Mr. Wray is correct, I assume he is, how have you focused on China? Or you can share that, I hate to blame you, but how has your organization, following what Mr. Wray said, responded?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I'm not familiar with the specific meeting that you referenced, sir. I'll be happy to look into it and have my staff look into it. But what I can say as a general matter is a lot of what you described there often requires export of sensitive technologies from the United States. So Customs and Border Protection works very closely with Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, which is tasked with enforcing export of sensitive technology. Through that partnership, we do make interdictions at export when we get the correct information from the Bureau of Industry.
Okay, I'm asking, are you focusing on China? That's my question. And if so, are you prioritizing China? That's my question.
Okay, I apologize, sir. Yeah, so we're responsible at import for managing all threats. And in the context of IPR, well over 90% of counterfeit goods come from China and Hong Kong. They're consistently named on the USTR Special 301 report as a source for counterfeits. We are absolutely concerned about that threat, and it's something we think about every day.
Mr. Ball, same question.
Again, as my colleague said too, not being familiar with the interchange that you mentioned, I can't tell you on that same line to even go a couple steps further. On the export of sensitive technology, that is part of what we do under HSI Global Trade. We have our counter-proliferations investigations. And yes, we are focusing on China, on Russia, on Iran, on what's happening in those theaters. With the export of sensitive technologies, we have a wonderful working group, E2C2. It's our Export Enforcement Coordination Center, and we work hand in hand with DOJ and with Department of Commerce using their strike force for prosecutions on those cases.
Let me shift to Mr. Goldfoot. Mr. Goldfoot, you mentioned some activity in this space. How much more do you think we should be doing than what you mentioned? The suggestion by Mr. Director Wray was that we're not doing enough. Do you agree? And if so, what would you do in addition to what he has suggested?
Thank you for that question. It's a very interesting one. So, and thank you also for repeating and amplifying Director Wray's comments about this. I think also not only he, but the Office of Deputy ODNI in the annual threat report said specifically that Beijing is seeking to increase its science and technology sector in part through the theft of intellectual property. This is absolutely a concern within the Department of Justice. We're prioritizing that. I think to your question of how much more should be doing, what more should be doing, I hesitate to describe the limit of how much we ought to be doing. I think in this field, as you see the amount of intelligence go by, you see information about the extent of the theft, it's just deeply concerning. As I've said before, if we had more resources, we would do more of these cases. We're interested in doing more of this. And I also, having Mike for this, I want to emphasize that within the Department of Justice, this work is primarily coordinated through my colleagues in the National Security Division, who treat intellectual property theft for the benefit of foreign nation states alongside the other ways that foreign nation states are breaking our laws in order to advance themselves.
Thank you. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross, for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being with us today. I'm really grateful that this subcommittee has shown such a bipartisan interest in protecting American innovation. This hearing is yet another example of that focus and the work between the chairman and the ranking member. Criminal IP theft costs American innovators hundreds of billions of dollars every year. 47% of brands have lost sales to counterfeit goods, a third of which have been reported, and at a drop in revenue of 10% or more. As you know, this is a serious loss to American innovation and one that administration after administration has tried to combat. Mr. Goldfoot, my first question is for you. In 2020, Congress passed the Protecting Lawful Streaming Act to close a loophole in the law that allowed sophisticated criminal enterprises operating streaming websites to traffic illegally copyrighted material. It's important, given that the American motion picture and television industries contribute 2.4 million jobs across the United States. And in 2022 alone, there were over 215 billion visits to pirate sites, many which look much more sophisticated than they did even a few years ago. Piracy of filmed entertainment costs the U.S. economy $29.2 billion annually. Now that Congress has closed that loophole in the law, I'm interested in how this authority has been used. Has DOJ pursued any actions using this new tool?
Thank you for the question. So, in fact, last week, the District of South Carolina, in a press release, announced what we believe to be the first concluded case for the Protecting Lawful Streaming Act. The defendant's name was Franklin Valverde, and that press release came out on May 2nd. However, having given you that example, I don't want to give the impression that the Protecting Lawful Streaming Act has been used as much as you or I might hope. Let me first thank all the members of the subcommittee for the work that many of you did in getting the PLSA passed. That's an important new authority. We were able to take down some streaming services before the passage of the PLSA, charging defendants based on conduct they did before that statute was enacted, using the 1976 Copyright Act and other authorities. One example I can give is Gears TV. This was a service that was essentially stealing streams from channels, reselling that. We were able to charge and convict that individual under the Copyright Act of '76. Another example I would give, this was also a use initially of the PLSA, was a defendant named Joshua Street, who was charged in the Southern District of New York. Now, his business, he was stealing the streams from sporting events. So Major League Baseball, NFL, he would get all of them. Now, he would get them through various means, but for Major League Baseball specifically, he was charged with hacking into their facilities in order to get that. Now, that's a helpful example because it shows that when we address these, it isn't necessarily one or two statutes that are always going to get used. In that case, we had a guy who was violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And so he was charged with that and also with the Protecting Lawful Streaming Act. In the end, that was a plea. He pled to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and not to the PLSA. That was still there in the case and was used there. So the PLSA is a welcome development for us. I agree with you also. Streaming services are an enormous concern of ours. We have taken down, as I mentioned, there was Gears TV. We took down Jetflix and a related site named Stream It All. I want to take down more. I hate seeing these things up. I'm very interested in everything we can do to address it. With more resources, we can address more of these, but I'm quite proud of the work that we've been doing on it so far. And the PLSA is going to help us do more in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. With the very limited time that we have, Mr. Ball, one of my colleagues touched earlier on AI and China. Can you tell us anything that you're doing to address President Biden's executive order on AI and enforcement for AI?
Yes, ma'am. Very important question. In that executive order, the National IPR Center and HSI were specifically tasked working with industry to find out what threats they're seeing from AI and what these industries, especially the ones that have a large technological support, are using AI to protect their intellectual property. And then creating a training program specifically for medium and small businesses that might not have those resources. At the National IPR Center, with all the partners that we have, another one of the unique things that we have is partnerships with academia. We have these incredible research institutions in the United States. We specifically partner on many of these items with Michigan State University and their ACAP program, their anti-counterfeiting and property protection program, and we have employed their very robust research engine to have PhD and master students reach out to industry across the spectrum. Right now, they have gathered quite a bit of data. Talking to their research lead just last week, it's the best response they've ever received on any research project from industry. So we're in the process of putting that together. One initial finding that I can talk about now is that industry is finding that the initial threat that's coming from AI is using AI to attack their computer systems and hacking, to overcome their encryption to steal their trade secrets. That's just one that's coming out of that, and we'll be working to put together a training course on that as well.
It's all right, I had to make up for my excess and my ranking member's indulgence.
Almost as abusive as...
Oh, don't go there. Important question, important answer. We now go to the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Intellectual property protections are vital to our nation's economic success. And not only that, it is a extremely personal right in a sense, in that it is a right that an individual, or for that matter, an enterprise has to benefit from the fruits of their labor and from their own enterprise. So I think this is a very important hearing because to the extent that our intellectual property laws are not being enforced or adhered to, then it undermines both that right and the economic vitality of our country. In addition to that, the theft of intellectual property also potentially has national security concerns and concerns when it comes to the competitiveness of the United States, particularly with respect to China. In 2023, Customs and Border Protection seizures of goods from the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong alone made up more than half of the agency's total seizures and more than 80% of the value of IP infringing goods seized. Approximately 80% of all economic espionage cases prosecuted by the Department of Justice involve theft of trade secrets by the Chinese government or its instrumentalities or agents, and approximately 60% of all trade secret misappropriation cases brought in the United States have a nexus to China. In addition, as of just a few years ago, of 2020, the FBI had approximately 1,000 open investigations involving China's attempted theft of US-based technology in all 56 field offices spanning almost every industry and every sector. So, Mr. Goldfoot, you made a point a few minutes ago to my colleague about how China has specifically used the theft of intellectual property in the US and elsewhere to advance, is one tool to advance its science and technology sector. So could you expand on that as to how intellectual property theft by the CCP is harming the United States' global competitiveness and its competitiveness vis-a-vis China?
And thank you for that question. So, and as my colleagues in the National Security Division of the Justice Department and their Assistant Attorney General, Matt Olson, have said, it's an enormous concern that China is attempting to gain a competitive advantage over the United States by cutting corners and taking our technology rather than developing its own. As you say, sir, one of the issues we protect intellectual property at all is in order to encourage people to develop it, to give a sort of property right over it so that we're encouraging investment and everything else. There's damage whenever that's lost, yes, but it's doubly damage when that is a loss that then benefits one of our chief adversaries in technology and science. So I can tell you this is an issue that I see come across my desk repeatedly as we discuss these issues with our National Security Division colleagues. They're quite cited to this as well. The problem that is being created by a foreign nation state benefiting from U.S. technology improperly by acquiring it either through theft or through acquisition.
Mr. Lord, same question. Do you have any thoughts on the broader concerns this raises for United States competitiveness and security?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. I largely agree with Mr. Goldfoot. What I think about from Customs and Border Protection standpoint, though, is a lot of this trade secrets theft oftentimes involves export, right? Export of sensitive technology. And while we have the authorities to interdict with our partners on export, we've already talked a lot about that we've got a lot coming in, 4 million small packages. And so it is going to be important that we all think about new and innovative ways to prevent physical technology from being exported out of the United States to our adversaries.
Thank you. So I think this underscores, two things. Number one is the need for greater scrutiny, which unfortunately this administration has perhaps taken a step back from when it comes to the concerted efforts of the CCP to steal U.S. intellectual property. But number two, it speaks to the need to have strong intellectual property protections for our own inventors, for our own innovators, so that we're able to advance our science and technology and continue our lead in key technology areas where unfortunately we have been, falling behind even with respect to China and others in recent years. So I appreciate you calling this hearing, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of the witnesses. It's been very informative, not only your oral testimony, but the written statements that we were able to read in advance. I think all of us agree that protecting intellectual property is very important, not only for the creators, but for the security of the United States and its people. I'm interested, you're talking about the packages interdicted and the counterfeits, and there's a lot of counterfeits that could be harmful to people, but I'm wondering, among the counterfeit goods that have been interdicted, how many of them are toys? Because I always worry the Consumer Product Safety group, tests toys to make sure that children are not harmed by them, but they don't do that, of course, with the counterfeits. Can you enlighten us on that point, any of you?
I assume that question was to me, Congresswoman?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. We do in fact encounter counterfeit toys. We do in fact encounter substandard toys. We encounter children's bike helmets that don't survive a basic drop test onto a concrete floor and then shatter when they hit the floor. We're fortunate enough, though, to have at many of our ports of entry a Consumer Product Safety Commission inspector to help us make sure that we are seizing the appropriate goods. I do not have a specific breakout here for you today for toys. I'll just say that last fiscal year, we did seize just over 230,000 game consoles and accessories. And from that, I would imagine there's a portion of toys in there. Toys is a big focus of what we do. We focus on that a little bit more from the import safety aspect.
Right.
Because there's other aspects that maybe they're not counterfeit, but maybe there's too much lead in the toy. So there's just a little bit of a different lens there. I'd be more than happy to have my team follow up with your
Sure,
staff.
whatever, I mean, I don't want to put a lot of extra work on you. I'd rather you spent the time enforcing, but whatever data you have, I would appreciate having. Last Congress, we passed the INFORM Act, which was a pretty robust piece of legislation helping to reduce counterfeit goods online. One of the things about that is that it gave concurrent jurisdiction not only to the FTC, but to state attorney generals. Do we know whether the state attorney generals have taken advantage of the new authority that they have under that act? Anyone?
I'm sorry, I do not know the answer to that question.
Or maybe that's something we can check on from the FTC. I was interested, Mr. Ball, in your testimony that you are collaborating with outside groups. I think that's very smart because they're also on the lookout to protect their property. You mentioned that you had a partnership with the Motion Pictures Association, which I think is terrific. We had a hearing a while ago where they showed a website that was abroad that was massively infringing on movies. And it's important that we figure out how to deal with that. I'm wondering if you have had success working with the MPA on cutting out or dealing with illegal streaming sites that operate from outside the United States.
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question as well. We have. With our digital piracy working group, dealing with the Recording Industry of America that's dealing with
Yeah, they got the same problem.
those AI threats right now and what MPA is looking at and what they're dealing with illegal streaming. One of the issues that working with this partnership, as you mentioned, industry is losing money, so industry is a vested interest, and they are our first line of intelligence and information. MPA is the organization that was able to inform us that circumvention devices were changing from physical devices, and then that's where our relationship comes in with CBP.
Right.
We're able to tell them, here are the different devices that they're using. Now it's going to more software-based. So the issue with digital streaming will always be taking down sites and the sites going up so easy.
Yeah.
So our goal is to work with all of these partners with a focus on disrupting the network and dismantling the organization. We've recently had some great success in talking to the website hosting services to get their voluntary agreement in addition to court orders to where a joint MPA, IPR center communication just to take that website down or to block it while we're trying to figure, instead of waiting for a court process. So we have a wonderful relationship.
That's very smart. As you know, we're trying to work through various other legal remedies that don't disrupt the actual workings of the internet, but also are effective in protecting American interests. So I'm glad to hear that you're succeeding even without our successful conclusion of that, but I'm going to continue working on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Goldfoot, I want to talk to you just briefly about China in particular. I want to go back to this issue of China. I think we can all agree that China really is the most major actor out there from a country that is infringing on our intellectual property. Would you agree with that?
Sir, I do agree with that based on what I have seen.
Right, and by statistics, when we actually prosecute crimes such as economic espionage cases or trade secret misappropriations cases, most of those, by an overwhelming majority, actually are against entities or individuals connected to the PRC, correct?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually unsure if we have accurate statistics from that, but anecdotally, what you say does sound right to me.
I can tell you the statistics I've seen is about 80% of the economic espionage cases are connected to the PRC, and about 60% of the cases for trade secret misappropriations are connected to the PRC. But anecdotally, I think that you would agree with that. So let's talk about the China Initiative, because when the China Initiative was dropped in February of 2022, we saw a decline in actual cases prosecuted after that time. Isn't that true?
Thank you for the question. So when Assistant Attorney General Olson announced an end to the China Initiative, in the same speech, he announced the beginning of a new strategy to counter nation-state threats.
So on that new strategy then, because the numbers I looked at said that in fiscal year 22, that same time that this program got canceled, this Chinese initiative, we actually prosecuted 0 of the trade secret misappropriation cases or 0 of the economic espionage cases. Is that accurate?
So I do not have that statistic at my fingertips, but it would coincide with what I think to be true, that the number went down for that year. I don't believe that that was because of the cancellation of the China Initiative. As I said before, fluctuations from year to year in the number.
If we're going to, even if we change the name or change initiatives, would you agree that we ought to be ramping up our efforts to push back against Chinese intellectual property theft, or should we be reducing our enforcement efforts?
Well, thank you for that question, because I think all of us agree that we ought to be increasing our amount of intellectual property.
Absolutely agree with that. And unfortunately, the numbers are showing that we're decreasing our enforcement, which is really a big problem, I think, for us, because they're ramping up their efforts to steal our intellectual property, and we seem to be reducing our efforts to push back against that. Let me ask about criminal enforcement in particular. We've got criminal enforcement statutes out there for trademark and copyright. We do not have them out there for patent infringement. Would you agree that that might be something we need to look into as it relates to foreign entities and espionage cases?
Well, thank you for that question. It's an interesting idea I haven't heard before. I'm not sure if I've seen a bill about it, so I don't know if standing here right now I could weigh in on that idea. If I could address your prior question a little bit more, if I could, I want to emphasize that the work of prosecuting trade secret theft in order to benefit the PRC is absolutely continuing. And there, you can see in my statement for the record, 5 cases announced over the last couple of months of arrests of individuals who are taking electric vehicle battery information, missile guidance systems, artificial intelligence source code, all to benefit the People's Republic of China. Those are arrests. They're innocent until proven guilty. I should emphasize that. You can see the work against that is continuing apace. I am not aware of any particular prosecutor or agent being told, well, I'm sorry, the China Initiative is canceled, so now you're going to be working on other things.
Was there anything communicated to the U.S. Attorney's Office about the cancellation of the China Initiative, the reasons for that?
Assistant Attorney General Olson made public remarks at George Mason University in February 2020.
Other than that, was there anything said internally to the Justice Department, or were there any changes made to the Justice Manual as a result of the decision to cancel the China Initiative?
I'm not sure I'm able to answer your question, sir. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Would you agree that perhaps we ought to also look into additional enforcement actions that are private actions that maybe put more teeth into the individuals behind these entities that are actually engaging in the intellectual property theft? Would that be an appropriate response?
Yes, I would say that really the leading force in enforcing intellectual property rights in the United States has always been private sector civil lawsuit enforcement. We, on the criminal side, tend to reserve ourselves for the most egregious cases where the deterrent effect of criminal law can have the most impact.
One last question on that. Do you think that injunctive relief, additional injunctive relief, the ability to get injunctions, permanent injunctions when there is infringement in patent cases would be an essential tool to bring back American businesses to get their redress here in American courts as opposed to going to Chinese courts?
Thank you for your question. It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure that we've seen a bill about that. I don't feel comfortable weighing in on the idea now, but we'd be happy to examine any legislation you ask the department to comment on.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of you. Mr. Goldfoot, let me stick with you. I think along the lines of the questions you were just getting, and some previous to that, I think it's clear at this point that there's bipartisan view that we'd like to do more with respect to addressing economic espionage issues and, theft of trade secrets and the like. On a couple of occasions, you said if we had the resources, we would do more of these cases. And I don't know if that's which set of cases you meant, but one thing I did want to figure out, though, was what kind of resources do you need? Because it's a rare moment in Congress here where there's bipartisan agreement that this is something that needs to happen, especially with respect to the PRC. What sorts of resources do you need to ramp up the prosecution efforts?
Thank you for the question. So being a career official in the Department of Justice, it's not my place to make, for example, a budget request or anything independent of what the administration is, or what they're asking for. What I can tell you as far as the work we're supervising and what we're seeing, we use the resources we have in order to recruit and train prosecutors who can then work with investigators in the field to appropriately build cases. Intellectual property cases are hard. They're hard because of the statutes involved and the elements you need to prove. They're hard also increasingly because of the international aspect of them. I think that probably is one of the biggest changes we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. We're no longer in the world of 2012 when you could do something like the mega upload takedown by just finding their servers in the United States and seizing them and knocking out one of the biggest infringers at the time. What you have now is the criminals are adapting to tactics like that. They're attempting to locate their businesses themselves and their servers in jurisdictions where they calculate, or sometimes incorrectly, that the United States cannot get law enforcement cooperation. So increasingly, the resource and tool we need isn't just within the Department of Justice. We rely on the nation's international relations.
Let me get you to focus on what is internal. I mean, do you need more investigators? Do you need more prosecutors? I mean, what do you need? What is it that we can do to help you ramp up those efforts? And I'm not asking you to, to sort of speak for the White House or anything along those lines on specific budgetary requests, but I do want to get a sense of what exactly we're talking about from, the standpoint of if you need additional resources, what are they?
Well, thank you for the question. I can just repeat that, with more input, you get more output. And I think we are looking, I think it's a mixture of everything that you have described here.
All right, let me, just a last point, I think, with respect to this issue. I think it was your testimony that touched on intended loss. Not to get too deep into the weeds on the sentencing guidelines, but I think it's a good point that you made with respect to the calculation of intended loss, depending on how low it is, undermines the likely range that you can get for jail time. And so it says here that in your testimony, you're seeking to, with the Sentencing Commission, to get a reworking of the definition of how that's defined. A quick suggestion, I think part of the reason that judges increasingly became suspicious about that was because of the way the department was using it in some unrelated matters, but like credit card fraud. So, you know, you get a guy steals a credit card that we can charge up to $20,000, and he buys I don't know, something for $100, and the prosecutors come in and say, well, we think the sentencing guideline should be based on $20,000 calculation. Judges started dismissing that, basically. So I appreciate the fact you're going to the Sentencing Commission on this, but I'd encourage you to try and separate your prosecutions from those kinds of prosecutions. And then real quickly, I see I'm running out of time. One of the issues that I heard with respect to my participation on the Homeland Security Committee with some of the seizures, and this goes to at the border with respect to imported goods. This was forced labor, Uyghurs, China, and the like. I also raised the issue of forced enslaved labor with respect to some minerals like cobalt coming largely from Africa, but frequently through China anyway. One of the things that was said by one of your colleagues at Homeland Security was that sometimes they would detect these goods and reject them as opposed to seizing them. In fact, it sounded like they reject them more than they seize them. And one of the things I asked them to do was to increase the number of seizures, because if you just reject it, they just send it somewhere else and they're not losing the money. It undermines the sanction that could be had. When you go through the effort, and as you pointed out, there's hundreds of millions of these items coming through. When you catch one, I think you have to put the hammer down to as much as possible. It's tough to prosecute these criminally sometimes, but administratively, do that if you can. And then the last quick point, the task force, the UFLPA task force, which I think DOJ is on as well, with respect to that type of labor, also isn't generating a lot of prosecutions or even the number of entities that are on these lists having been caught with trying to import these defective goods. If there's a way to ramp that up, I would appreciate it as well, because one way or the other, we've got to find ways to prosecute these cases or at least make an impact with administrative or civil sanctions, so we send the message back to China or whoever's sending these goods that we're going to enforce it and there's going to be a sanction for it. So I apologize for running over, Mr. Chairman, but I thank you for the time and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ball, in your testimony, you spoke about how the Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, or the IPR Center, operates with partnerships with over 20 other federal agencies and academic institutions, as well as stakeholders in the private sector. Would you elaborate on how HSI's partnership with the National Football League and the Motion Picture Association work and what outcomes these partnerships have created?
Yes, ma'am. Fantastic question. Our partnerships across the spectrum of intellectual property benefit both business and our criminal investigations. One of those keys is the NFL. The Super Bowl every year is a major, major event for both human trafficking and obviously intellectual property theft. We work hand in hand with the NFL and with the brands and the apparel manufacturers, and we conduct operations around large events. The sports manufacturers provide subject matter experts with teams of HSI agents in the field taking these goods, and then as a key partnership in the National IPR Center and to these events is our CBP partnership. Identifying where these routes, the ports, intelligence of where things are coming from for seizures of everything from counterfeit rings to jerseys to all kinds of sports apparel. We have that same kind of relationship with the Motion Picture Association as well. I have found that industry, when they own what is happening to their products and they share that information from us, it helps direct our criminal investigations much more effectively. And when they take what has been called before onesie-twosie seizures and they help put those together with what's happening not only to their brand, but then we can take that and attach it to what's other brands going after networks versus just individual shippers.
And tell us, if you would, how the IPR Center is working with universities on similar types of partnerships.
Another great question, thank you. I'm going to go back to Michigan State University. Michigan State University's ACAP program isn't a degree program, it's multidisciplinary. So there's law students, business students, criminal justice students that are all focused on property protection. They have a massive database of research, of information that's informed by industry, where they go out and they'll look at a particular problem set in a particular way. What we're doing with them in the AI space, we replicated with them in a program that we created jointly called IP Protect. We were finding from our industry partners that these medium and small businesses weren't having the same benefit of having an internal large brand protection program within their industry. So we created this IP Protect program with MSU to inform medium and small businesses how they can better protect their IP.
Would it potentially be productive for you to expand those partnerships to include other universities like the University of Florida or the University of South Florida and access their IP research databases as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We were in some of the questioning earlier about what we can do with more. Congress was generous enough to provide Homeland Security Investigations some enhancement money in the FY23 budget, and we use that to not only on the IP space to increase what we're doing with the government supply chain investigative unit outside of our work with DOD, also in our wildlife and environmental crimes. And I know, just recently speaking with my team leads of our wildlife and environmental crimes, that they're actually talking to both those universities.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today. For generations, the textile industry has been a pillar of the economy in both South Carolina and the United States. Darling Fibers, in the district I represent, is one of the largest domestic producers of high-quality fibers for fabric, garment, and fashion industries. Milliken, also in South Carolina, is located in Spartanburg and has been in the business since the 1800s. I've heard from many of my constituents concerning their concerns regarding de minimis. So most of my questions are going to be centered around that. De minimis imports from places like China have exceeded 1 billion total packages just last year, according to the CBP reports. E-commerce giants are flooding the U.S. market with low-cost products. Many of them, as we know from the hearing today, are counterfeit. And yet they avoid inspection and taxes. Unfortunately, this number, I think, is expected to grow in the coming years. Deputy Director Lord, you oversee CBP policy and enforcement priorities, and I've heard from many constituent companies about the problems they are facing due to the influx of de minimis packages entering the U.S. We've heard that 85% of all IP seizures occur in the de minimis environment, and it's become a highway for other illicit goods, such as fentanyl, which has been talked about here. The sheer volume of these duty-free packages, though, is crippling our own economy and our own companies and our own American workers, especially in textiles, which is a crucial industry not only for my district, but my state and indeed the country. So, Mr. Lord, how do we close these loopholes? What policy recommendations would be helpful to you in closing these loopholes?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Congressman. I want to acknowledge first that Customs and Border Protection is very much aware of the challenges that the textile industry is facing in this moment. We've been working closely with the domestic textile producers in the United States since, we'll say, September or October of last year. I've had the privilege of going down to some of the production facilities in South Carolina that you've mentioned during my career. It's an impressive operation. And I don't wake up every day, and my staff does not wake up every day not thinking about how to protect U.S. jobs. When it comes to the specific challenges in de minimis, we are ramping up our inspections of textile products in the de minimis environment. As an agency, we've made investments at some of our laboratory and scientific services centers around the country in Savannah, New York, and Los Angeles. They will have very cutting-edge technology to begin testing textiles for compliance with the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. We do intend and are deploying that technology in the de minimis environment. There's a perception that we're not testing for that in the de minimis environment. That is not true.
Mr. Lord, let me ask you something real quick, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I've got 2 minutes, so I just want to kind of vet this thing through a little bit. Do you think that maybe labeling China as a country of concern would be a prudent step for us to take in Congress? Because we know that most of these issues are coming from the PRC, at least they're a big actor in this, but would that be helpful to you in your efforts to do your job?
That is an excellent question, sir. It's difficult for me to answer without understanding what that label might trigger for additional, in terms of additional legal authorities or presumption of guilt or anything along those lines. At Customs, we're focused on the China threat, sir. More than happy to explore those ideas with you and your staff. We're committed to finding workable solutions in the de minimis space.
Mr. Lord, as part of your portfolio, you oversee the de minimis data pilot program. What insights can you provide about the results so far?
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate you asking that question, sir. Our 2 pilot programs in the de minimis environment have been running since the summer of 2019. Those 2 pilot programs look at a couple different things, but what I'll just highlight is what we're discovering is there is better data out there that will help us better segment risk and identify compliant or non-compliant shipments, particularly from what I'll call non-traditional actors in the supply chain, to include online marketplaces. We have successfully been able to pair a web address of a product listing with a small package coming through. That data from that website helps us make better risk management decisions. Last fiscal year, when there was 1 billion small packages entering the United States, over half of them had additional information from one of those 2 tests, which to us signals an interest in the private sector in getting this additional data for us. And as a result, we're in the process now of updating our regulations to codify the lessons learned from those tests.
Thank you for that, and I'll just conclude by saying, look, there are so many concerns. I didn't know a lot about IP when I got onto this subcommittee, but there are so many concerns from the fees and tariffs that the United States is missing out on with the within the de minimis space. There's no adherence by foreign actors or entities on the Uyghur Act that you mentioned, labor standards. The IP concerns are very self-evident when you look at kind of what we're talking about here. And of course, at the end of the day, the real impact, and this isn't a fault at you, I'm just kind of sharing the concern that I have, which I think you share too, is that American workers and American companies are put at a disadvantage because we basically have created a free trade agreement with China because of this, because they're shipping these things in with substandard labor standards, and American companies are forced to compete with that on an international stage at a very big disadvantage to them. And so, however we can partner with you, I'm happy to do that and listen to your insights, because I think this is a very big issue for our country to tackle. Thank you so much.
Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Lord?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that, Congressman. I would just like to say and offer my staff to reach out to your staff. We have an initiative that I mentioned in my opening remarks, the 21st Century Customs Framework Initiative, that proposes statutory changes to help us better manage this environment. We are concerned, just to be very direct, and we do need help and are eager to partner with Congress, so thank you.
Well, and thank you, by the way, for being, and all 3 of you, quite frankly, but thank you for being a witness that actually answers questions. We have that very rarely in Congress sometimes, so thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'm going to go ahead and take a few minutes to ask some questions as well. Mr. Goldfoot, I've heard you speak about how the past several years has seen fewer IP-related cases brought by DOJ, the fact that the Protecting Lawful Streaming Act of 2020, which I was pleased to see enacted, has only been used to conclusion once. Is that your testimony?
We have announced, I believe, 1 case where someone was sentenced under that act.
What resources or authorities does the DOJ believe it lacks at this point to enforce criminal copyright piracy laws effectively?
Thank you for the question. So, enforcing criminal, going after streaming sites specifically, which is the target of Protecting Lawful Streaming Act, is a very difficult lift investigatively, yes, but also in terms of securing the necessary foreign cooperation, it's quite difficult. So, for some of the streaming sites we're talking about, I don't want to say their name in order to give them publicity, but you probably know which one I'm referring to. The location of the servers, location of the domain name registration, location of the individuals responsible are all outside the United States. And they've attempted to locate themselves in places where they believe that their local law enforcement will not follow U.S. legal process in terms of getting at them. How do we approach such a situation? I think first, there's no substitute for slowly over time building appropriate law enforcement relationships with our international partnerships, coming to common understanding, helping each other out in investigations, providing case-based mentoring, and so on as that proceeds. I think separate from that, given the profusion of these sites and the amount of streaming occurring, as the amount of crime increases, it's helpful if we can increase our capacity to address it at the same time.
Okay. Back in December, this subcommittee held a hearing on digital copyright piracy in the film and television industry, and at that hearing, we heard testimony about a notorious foreign pirate site, F-Movies, which the Motion Picture Association testified averages 98 million users a month, with 33% of the traffic coming from the United States. We saw a demonstration showing how easy it was to access high-quality copies of American movies and television shows, advertised using the studio's copyrighted cover art and organized by title, genre, season, and episode. It also used an interface highly similar to legitimate streaming services. U.S. Chamber estimates these sites cost the U.S. economy at least $29 billion in lost revenue annually. U.S. intellectual property rights holders referred F-Movies to the IPR Center 5 years ago in 2019, and HSI brought in Vietnamese law enforcement in early 2021. A couple of years ago, HSI believed that Vietnamese law enforcement was wrapping up the investigation and close to making arrests, but since then, the case seems to have stalled numerous times. In the meantime, this streaming piracy site dedicated to infringing content continues to see over 160 million visits per month, a third of which traffic still comes from the United States. So can you speak to the challenges of working with international law enforcement on prosecuting streaming piracy cases and with Vietnamese law enforcement specifically regarding F-Movies?
Thank you. I assume the question is directed to me, sir.
Yes.
So thank you for the question. So, of course, longstanding policy prevents me from commenting about or confirming or denying the existence of any particular investigation. I think, however, your question is quite astute in pointing out the difficulties that we have in going after streaming sites or foreign defendants when they're located in jurisdictions where you're having challenges dealing with them. I think that increasingly, we see this as an issue not solely for the Department of Justice, but administration-wide, looking also as part of a foreign policy and other ways to address the problem.
Mr. Ball, Mr. Lord, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I will say, sir, that yes, our relationship with the MPA and this case and many other cases, the problem that we face, as mentioned earlier, is shifting the jurisdictions, shifting the sites, having the trained investigators to work those cases. So we've partnered with the MPA and with the RIAA and with one of our key partners, the National Cyber Forensic Training Alliance in Pittsburgh, to create a digital piracy training program, both for the investigators and for inspectors and for attorneys as well. We do face the same international challenges from an investigative standpoint. HSI has HSI offices in those countries working with their law enforcement, but we share the concern and the frustration from DOJ as well.
Mr. Lord?
Nothing further to add, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I'll ask one more question of Mr. Goldfoot. I've been concerned that the Biden DOJ has had recent significant losses in cases, including the case against Georgia Tech researcher Ji-Kung Chang. Mr. Chang is accused of collaborating with sanctioned PRC telecommunications company ZTE, assisting Chinese nationals applying for visas to claim to be students at Georgia Tech. And instead of attending Georgia Tech, the Chinese nationals traveled to the U.S. to work for ZTE. Mr. Goldfoot, despite these allegations, how many of the 10 counts against Mr. Chang were recently dismissed by the federal judge?
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure that that case was done under my supervision. I'm not certain of the answer.
Okay, the answer is 9. So a dismissal of 9 out of 10 counts generally would be troubling. Wouldn't you agree?
I would answer the question by saying I think the Department of Justice does not bring a count or indeed a prosecution unless we think we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. When losses happen, you take it to heart, you examine why it occurred, but I don't know if I can say more about a case I didn't supervise than that, sir.
Do you know the status of the Chinese nationals who Mr. Chang assisted?
No, I'm sorry, sir. This case was not under my supervision. I'm not familiar with the facts at all.
All right. My time's expired. I will yield back to the chairman.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of just one comment, and then we're going to close this out, if that's all right. Mr. Goldfoot, the last round of questioning I found great. I've got no objections, and I agree with all the questions. But isn't it also true that a little bit like Babe Ruth, that in fact, if you want to hit home runs, sometimes you get strikeouts, that you sometimes charge because you want to, in fact, enforce the law, and you don't always succeed. You know, in other words, you don't only take slam dunk cases is maybe the way to ask that.
Thank you for the question. I think I could describe the approach of the Department of Justice as that our job is, the Department of Justice wins when justice is done. We want to bring cases only when we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And you know, losses are regrettable, but as you say, sometimes that's how the breaks.
With that, this hearing has been informative. I would ask all the witnesses, would you agree to take additional questions from those who did not have sufficient time or who have follow-up questions?
Absolutely, sir.
Yes.
Of course, sir.
Okay. And with that, I'll leave 3 legislative days for those questions to be placed in the record and then submitted to you. Without objection, this hearing is concluded. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Thank you.